Hi, welcome to Hashimoto's Self-Management Program. I'm Dr. Isabella Wentz, and we are in Module 1, where we're talking about testing. For those of you that don't know me yet, I'm looking forward to getting to know all of you. I am a clinical pharmacist, author of Hashimoto's The Root Cause, author of Hashimoto's Protocol, creator of the Thyroid Secret documentary series, and most importantly, a Hashimoto's patient. I created this course to guide you on your journey back to your health. So, let's get started. During this module, you're going to learn all about the types of lab tests that you need to do to help you discover the root causes and triggers of your condition. These lab tests are going to help you determine a specialized treatment plan for yourself so that you can start feeling better right away. So, for this module's handouts, you have the Module 1 workbook, you have the sample thyroid journal, you have a handout that will teach you how to identify the things that make you feel better in your life and the things that make you feel worse. You have a health timeline, so we're going to go through and you're going to create a health timeline to go through all of the potential triggers and root causes and exacerbating factors that you may have encountered throughout your lifetime that have contributed to your health challenges. This health timeline will help us determine a proper course of action for you. And then you're also going to have a results guide to help you interpret the root cause assessments. So we're starting off with testing because testing is going to show us and help us discover what triggered the condition in your particular case. Now, testing is a very logical place to start because it'll help us to set up a plan. And there are things you can do without testing, but we do want to get the testing out of the way because a lot of times the test results do take some time to get back to you. And so we want to set this foundation up for you right now. So going back to why Hashimoto's happens. So Hashimoto's is an autoimmune thyroid condition that happens to impact the thyroid gland. In Hashimoto's, the immune system has recognized the thyroid gland as a foreign invader and has begun to launch an attack on the thyroid gland. Over time, as the thyroid gland is attacked, this results in a breakdown of the thyroid gland tissue and eventually leads to the thyroid gland no longer having enough physical structure to properly function. So when it's destroyed to a point where it can no longer create thyroid hormones, that's when we develop hypothyroidism. Most cases of hypothyroidism are actually caused by Hashimoto's in most of our developed nations. So Hashimoto's is an autoimmune condition. What does that mean? So every case of autoimmune disease, Hashimoto's is no different. Research now shows that there are three things that need to be present in order for the condition to develop. The three things are going to be having the right genetic predisposition, having the right triggers in place in your life, as well as intestinal permeability, or more simply, a leaky gut. Now, here's the key of all of this and why it's possible to reverse Hashimoto's and autoimmunity. All three of these things need to be present in order for an autoimmune condition to develop. All three of them need to be present in order for the autoimmune condition to continue manifesting. So for your body to keep attacking your thyroid gland, you need to have the right genes, the right triggers, and intestinal permeability at all different times for this to happen. Now, the exciting thing here is that when we address just one of these legs of a stool, so this is a three-legged stool of autoimmunity, all three legs need to be present for this to happen. When we remove just one of the legs, we can actually induce a remission of the condition. Now, people used to think that if you had the genes to develop Hashimoto's, you would develop it. And there was nothing else to it, right? And scientists are constantly looking at what genes are triggering Hashimoto's, what genes are contributing. But the truth is, given a strong enough trigger in the right kind of environmental circumstances, most of us actually do have the genetic predisposition to develop Hashimoto's. And this works from an adaptive physiology standpoint. So Hashimoto's, and I'll talk about my safety theory in a little bit greater detail, but Hashimoto's is basically a protective mechanism of the body to slow down our function and slow down our metabolism. And using the example of Chernobyl, so Chernobyl was radioactive fallout disaster that happened in the 80s in the Ukraine. What we saw in children of a specific age that were within a specific vicinity of Chernobyl and were exposed to this radiation, this really high dose, tragic amount of radiation, 80% of them ended up with Hashimoto's antibodies. Other children, some of them developed thyroid cancers. And so we know that given a strong enough trigger in our environment, we're going to develop Hashimoto's. And so for all of us, like myself, like you guys, really your body is sensing our environment, and the thyroid gland is sensing that there's something off in our environment. And really, we are the canaries in the coal mines. So we're the ones that are getting these messages that there are toxins and triggers in our environment first. Now, this doesn't mean that we're stuck with the condition, and this doesn't mean we can't do anything about it. This means that we need to think about how we can address the condition and use our brains to get to the bottom of it and to get ourselves into remission. So the three-legged stools. We know we can't change our genes, and most of us probably have the genes for Hashimoto's. So, that's not something that we could really address at this point. The next part is triggers. Triggers are root causes, and these can definitely be found and addressed. And we're going to go through this course, and you're going to learn all about the various triggers that you may have in your life, and you're going to figure out how to remove them from your life. Now, trigger hunting is not always a straightforward process. I do have some protocols you can follow, and I do have lab results that you can follow. However, not every time you're going to be able to identify your specific trigger, and you may not even be able to remove your specific trigger. But there's one part of the equation, one leg of this stool that we can always address, no matter what your triggers are, even if they're completely elusive. And that is going to be addressing the intestinal permeability or the leaky gut. Now, we can always improve gut function, and we always see an improvement in thyroid function and a reduction in the autoimmune process once we improve the gut function. If we can heal the gut and address that properly, we can also see a remission of Hashimoto's. So, we're going to be talking about all of this in greater detail and how to do just this, right? So this course is focused specifically on some of the practical tips and tools. So we know that Hashimoto's is a perfect storm where most people with the condition have a combination of nutrient deficiencies, food sensitivities, a poor response to stress, excess toxins or inability to get rid of them, intestinal permeability, and chronic infections. Hormonal imbalances are also going to be present in most cases of Hashimoto's, at least in the presence of an imbalance of thyroid hormones. Doing just one of these interventions is going to make you feel significantly better, and we're going to cover them throughout this course in greater detail. But if your goal is to reach remission with your Hashimoto's, you're going to need to address most likely every single one of these elements of the perfect storm. The safety theory of why thyroid disease and autoimmune thyroid disease develops is a theory that I came up with when I thought about what all of these different imbalances and what all of these different triggers had in common. And what I really realized is that Hashimoto's is our body's way of protecting itself. So our body, whenever it senses stress, and research has actually shown that the thyroid gland can send out stress signals to the rest of the body. They're called danger or damage associated molecular patterns. Whenever it senses danger from toxins or other types of things in our environment, the thyroid gland can actually induce an autoimmune response and can actually say, hey, it's time to shut down. It's time to break down some of me and help the body slow down. So the thyroid gland is really our environmental sensing gland. It's no secret that women oftentimes have more rates of thyroid disease than do men. And one of the reasons could be because women are more tuned into the environment, because women are the primary vessels for bringing new life into this earth. And so to make sure that we have the best outcomes for our babies, for our future, for our progeny, we want to make sure that we are getting the best resources and we are reproducing in a time of abundance and in a time when resources are available to us. And one of the things that thyroid disease does is it slows down metabolism. Another thing it does is it slows down our reproductive drive. And so whenever we have thyroid disease, we also have a lower fertility rate. Now, this can be beneficial and this can be protective in times of famine, in times of danger, in times of stress, when there are lots of toxins around, or when we are struggling with an infection or some sort of a trauma. Now, in my opinion, thyroid disease develops because of something in our environment that is sending a message to our body that we're not safe. And the body wants to protect us, so it does the thing that it knows best to do, and that's to conserve resources. And the best way to conserve resources is by slowing down the metabolism. And the best way to do that is to attack the thyroid gland and get the metabolism gland to stop working so hard, right? And so this is the adaptive physiology model of how Hashimoto's may have played a protective role during caveman and cave women times. The key to reversing Hashimoto's in modern days, because, let's face it, most of us are not in a sense of danger. On a day-to-day life, the majority of us are not in danger, but yet there are things in our environment that are being perceived as dangerous by our ancient bodies. And part of restoring balance within your body is to let your body know that it's safe. Now, you can't necessarily have a conversation with your body and say, hey, body, thyroid, we're safe. No need to do all this. You don't have to attack me. I'm all good, right? So the way that we have to do this, we have to send safety signals to our body and to the thyroid gland. The way that we send these safety signals is really by giving ourselves enough sleep. So think of, what would a cave woman do, right? If a cave woman was not sleeping enough, that was probably because there was something seriously wrong in the environment. And so sleep deprivation can actually cause thyroid disease. And so that's a fundamental of healing, making sure you get plenty of sleep. If a cave woman wasn't properly nourished, that meant that there was a scarcity of food. Now, proper nourishment means you're not getting enough of the right foods or not getting enough food at all and not getting enough food nutrients. So another fundamental is going to be addressing your nutrition. Really, what this boils down to is making sure that you have the right kind of self-care on board, and you're really taking the time to nourish and carry yourself back to health. The other fundamental is going to be focused on mindset and stress reduction. So how do we send those safety signals into our body? And a lot of it has to do with how we respond to our everyday environments. I mean, the way that most of us respond to traffic nowadays, this could equivalent to how a caveman or cavewoman would react to a chasing tiger, right? So we're so frustrated and our body doesn't understand, right? Our body's saying, oh no, there's a tiger. I need to conserve energy. I need to conserve resources. And so mindset is going to be a key component of this. And then getting your hormones in balance. This is going to be a key component of thyroid disease in every single case and is part of the fundamental healing. The other things we're going to do, we're going to be addressing traumatic stress. We're going to be addressing toxins as well as infections. So Speaking of toxins, toxins have a way of inducing thyroid disease by damaging the thyroid gland and potentially resulting in immune imbalance. So, whenever we have too many toxins that build up in our bodies, basically, this can overwhelm our natural systems that keep things in balance and keep things in check. So, it's sort of like if you were thinking of a car when there are certain things that are out of balance, a red light will go off, right? And so a light will say something's out of balance. And that's what happens essentially with the thyroid gland. When we register too many toxins within our body through these various pathways we have, that can set off a signal that something is out of balance. So here is a listing of toxins that can damage the thyroid gland or cause an immune imbalance by overburdening our natural detox systems and then sort of sending off one of those registration lights. This is really important to note because you're going to want to think about any of these toxins or things that you may have been exposed to when you're doing your health timeline, and this will help us create a tailored plan for you. So, iodine excess is a potential thyroid trigger. This has been widely recognized as a trigger for thyroid disease. Copper toxicity. Copper is oftentimes going to be found in supplements, in foods like nuts and seeds. It can be found in the water supply. It can be found in the makeup. Mercury, most common source of mercury is going to be amalgams or those silver fillings that are not really silver. Sometimes seafood can be a source of mercury as well, and some supplements. Arsenic, one of the big sources of arsenic could actually be from our makeup. I was actually poisoned by arsenic with Benefit Benetint makeup. So anytime you've been exposed to conventional makeups, think about that. If you perhaps started using a certain makeup kind and all of a sudden you saw that you started to have more and more symptoms. Fluoride in our water supplies can be a potential thyroid toxin. Various other heavy metals. So anytime you've been exposed to heavy metals exposure, whether that's lead or mercury or any of the other metals. Mold. So if you ever moved into a home and you started to feel worse, if you ever lived in a home with black mold, with mildew, any home that's been flooded, there's a potential chance that you have been mold exposed, and that can be triggering of thyroid disease. Radiation. I was personally exposed to Chernobyl at age 4. And so that was one of the factors that brought on my thyroid disease. It wasn't the only one, but it definitely was one of the initiating factors. So a lot of us may be exposed to radiation depending on where we grew up. Some of it might be higher levels of radiation. Sometimes it might be lower levels of radiation. Nickel toxicity could be a potential trigger. Breast implants could trigger thyroid disease. Other types of implant surgeries can as well. So if you have dental implants, these could be potentially triggering. And there are other types of surgery or trauma that can lead to this. Medications can also cause damage to the thyroid gland. Some thyroid toxic medications include lithium, amiodarone, radioactive iodine, high-dose iodine, hepatitis C treatment, Accutane, and then some of the various cancer and monoclonal antibody medications used for autoimmune diseases. Infections. There's 3 different ways that infections can trigger thyroid disease. One of them is through a mechanism known as molecular mimicry, where the infection has similar proteins to it that the thyroid gland does. And as the immune system starts to attack the infection, it also attacks the thyroid gland. The other way is through the bystander effect. When the infection is within the thyroid gland, for example, the immune system tries to attack the thyroid gland because that's the home of the infection. So it's sort of like blowing up the home of your enemy, right? Instead of targeting the enemy directly. And the third way is going to be through leaky gut, or that intestinal permeability mechanism. And so big in focus of this course is going to be focusing on mouth infections, which can lead to intestinal permeability, such as abscessed teeth, root canals, periodontitis. as well as gut infections and food poisoning. These are things that can contribute to intestinal permeability. So some infections we're going to cover: blastocystis hominis, SIBO, small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, yeast, H. pylori, dysbiosis, or having a gut imbalanced bacteria, as well as some other types of bacterial infections. So all of these things can contribute to thyroid disease. I've seen cases of Hashimoto's that were induced by these infections and all of these different types of triggers. And the great thing is when we address them, we start feeling better. In some cases, we can get into remission. Viral infections, such as Epstein-Barr virus, herpes virus, hepatitis C, both the infection and the treatment of the infection can actually induce thyroid disease, which is unfortunate. Cytomegalovirus is another one. And there's other types of viruses that can trigger thyroid disease. There's other kinds of infections that can be potentially triggering. Research is showing more and more kinds of infections that trigger thyroid disease on a day-to-day basis. And really, it's anything that can have protein structures similar to the thyroid gland, that can be inside of the thyroid gland, or that can be inside of the gut. Some other infections that have been identified include Lyme disease, Mycoplasma, Streptococcus, and Mycobacteria. Stress. Stress is a really, really big trigger for thyroid disease. In fact, one of the very first cases of thyroid disease, this was actually Graves', was reported to be connected with stress when a woman was pushed in her wheelchair down a flight of stairs. And this was a very obviously stressful thing for her, and she developed Graves' disease shortly thereafter. Going back to the safety theory of autoimmune disease, this makes a lot of sense because the initial stress response for us when we're under acute stress is to become more hypervigilant. What does that mean? It means that we're ready for a fight, right? And having that extra rush of thyroid hormones is going to help us get into the groove and going to help us give us more agility, anxiety, irritability to potentially fight for our lives if we need to. And so most people don't realize, but the early stages of Hashimoto's are oftentimes going to be presenting with an overactive thyroid gland. And so we're going to see symptoms of hyperthyroidism. This is also known as Hashitoxicosis. And this is really how the condition develops in response to stressors within our environment and how it can be protective. So different types of stress: emotional stress, sleep deprivation, sleep apnea, excess exercise such as marathons, blood sugar abnormalities, having a family history or past history of sexual abuse, physical abuse, having even social rejection. So even being in a mean girls situation in high school, this can actually be connected to altered autoimmunity and Hashimoto's. Inflammation, trauma, all these things are stressors for the body. The important thing to remember is it could be past stressors or current stressors, and all these different things may need to be addressed. There's nutrition-based triggers, and they can cause inflammation as well as leaky gut. So we have nutrient deficiencies in selenium, vitamin D, B vitamins, iron, ferritin, potentially iodine, and zinc that can be indicative of causing Hashimoto's or contributing to Hashimoto's. Low-calorie eating can also create Hashimoto's or exacerbate Hashimoto's. We may have food reactions to specific foods: gluten, dairy, soy, grains, eggs, nuts, seeds, nightshades, oxalates, and sulfates are some of the more common reactive foods for people with Hashimoto's and thyroid disease. And then there's other types of triggers and root causes, such as having a blood transfusion. So potentially because of all of the different types of infections and foreign things that our body is getting all at once through a blood transfusion. Trauma to the neck, so actually physical damage to the thyroid gland, can induce an autoimmune response. Hormone disruption, so whenever we have either estrogen dominance, when we have a pregnancy, when we have oral contraceptives on board, or any kind of thing that can set off our hormonal response, even exposure to personal care products that have a lot of hormones in them, can induce thyroid disease because what happens is there's an altered increased need for thyroid hormones, and that is going to result in an upregulation of the immune process. Pregnancy is a very important trigger. The immune imbalance and depletion of nutrients are thought to be some of the contributing factors of pregnancy. So I hope that you go through this and you go through the health timeline and you start thinking about which of these triggers and exacerbating factors were relevant to your life.